Conflict is the lifeblood of any story that is actually worth telling. It comes in various shapes and forms, and they all present unique obstacles for your characters. Hi, I'm Matt the Creative, and I've read and watched hundreds of hours on Storycraft education, and I'll be breaking down what I've learned to give you a beginner's guide to conflict. So, what is the deal with conflict anyway, and why is it so important to your story? Within various different story structures like the hero's journey and the three-act structure, conflict sets much of the story into action. It's what challenges the characters and sets the tone for your story. Conflict is what lets you explore the deeper aspects of your story's theme and helps to captivate your audience. In fact, without conflict, there is no story. But conflict has many faces and many forms. Let me paint you a picture. Close your eyes and imagine yourself at sea with you and a crew during a chaotic storm. Wave after wave keeps crashing onto your boat. We can all see that this is a pretty crappy situation to be in. And it shows us one of the forms of conflict that we can see in stories. And that is the man versus nature conflict. And it's one of the most primal mediums of conflict that you can see in story. The story for survival in such a harsh and unforgiving world is a tale as old as time itself, and gives you some unique challenges for your characters. Nature often can't be directly fought against and requires adaptation from characters to deal with its nigh omnipresent feel. But it doesn't just have to be the weather. Mother Nature has far more bullshit than that. Since the dawn of humanity, we've had to come into conflict with various other creatures that we live and compete with, sometimes to the death. Disease, drought, famine. This can create conflict within your story. There is another form of conflict as well, though, that can be argued to be nearly as primal and is often the most common form of conflict that we see in anywhere, even in my own personal life. Quick story time. When I was younger, I wasn't always the nicest of kids, and I would often get into arguments with other kids in small little bouts. But there was this one girl. It was fourth grade. Let's just call her Betty. Me and her, we did not like each other at all. We had this rivalry where we would always be trying to outdo the other, which is understandable. We were like fourth graders, so we were kids. And we came constantly clash with each other. And as stories are an analogy for real life, this dynamic carries on into stories as the character versus character. And obviously, this is when one character comes into clash with another one. And you think I would be Captain Obvious. And you'd be right. I definitely am Captain Obvious for saying that. But what's also obvious is how much nuance and depth can be shown with this type of conflict. Characters are one of the three pillars of a good story. And so much rides on your characters. The direction of the plot takes, the theme, the point of view that we experience the story from, so on and so forth. So it makes sense that these would have a huge impact on your conflict as well. In fact, character versus character is the most common form of conflict that you'll probably ever see in fiction. Bowser versus Mario. The Ninja Turtles versus the Shredder. Goku versus Superman. I could honestly make an entire deep dive video on that topic by itself. And if you want a video, just let a homeboy know in the comment section, and I got you. But what I am going to take some time for is a story. Back in March of this year, I was living with some friends of mine in an apartment. And it was three and me other guys, and I lived with these guys for about 2 years, and I've known them for at least over 5 years. So you can say that these guys were my crew. They're some of my best buddies, and still to this day. So when I made the decision to leave and move back in with family, it was a tough decision. I had a lot of doubts and worries, and I was wondering if it was even the best decision and how it would affect my friendships. And it ate at me for some time, even though logically I knew it was for the best. To quote the Greek philosopher Marcus Tullius Cicero, a man has no enemy worse than himself. And that's a powerful quote right there. And just as it applies to real life, it also applies to storytelling. This is known as the man versus self conflict, and it's one of my personal forms of conflict. Man versus self conflict allows for a deeper exploration of the characters, especially when it forces characters to make difficult decisions. A great example of this would be Darth Vader's self conflict in the original Star Wars trilogy. When Darth Vader confronts his son for the final time towards the end of Episode 6, as evil and hateful as Vader is, he comes into conflict with himself because he doesn't want to kill his own kid. And with some nudging from Luke, he eventually turns and helps to defeat Palpatine in the end, giving him a redemption arc. And with Palpatine's defeat spells the end of the Empire. Or at least until the hot garbage that is the sequels begin. But we ain't gonna get into that today. But what I am going to get into is a type of conflict that seems as insurmountable as the Empire itself. Sometimes it's not just another person that stands against your character, but an overarching power. Perhaps it's the government, traditions, technology, laws, or even an ideal. These things are sewn into us by culture and aren't easily uprooted. A great example can be seen in the world of One Piece, with the world government and how it symbolizes control and dominance in the world of One Piece. And it represents the ultimate challenge to Luffy and his crew, who symbolize freedom. I'm a sucker for this form of conflict because of how you are able to weave the theme of your story into the type of culture and societies that you create. Now, there is a trap in all of this, though, and it was one that I made myself back in the 7th grade when I was drawing a comic. It was called The Adventure of Narku, and it was a hot pile of dog crap. A pile so big, in fact, that it could have only been made by Clifford the Big Red Dog himself. But I was also like 12, so it was understandable. But in the story, I had constant fights and battles, in which I was a terrible artist at the time, so it was mainly a bunch of Dragon Ball beam clashes and punches that would launch people into the moon. And as much as we love those anime fights and so on and so forth, and it can be okay to have fights like that in movies, but if you're doing like novels or on the page or the stage, you'll have some hiccups because your conflict needs to actually have some meaning to the character. It shouldn't just be senseless violence and fights or just getting in the way for no reason. Conflict allows us to explore the deeper aspects of your characters. And so when you have conflict arise, make sure that it does that in some way. And with that being said, that is the beginner's guide on conflict. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and a comment, and I'll see you in the next one.